piano for Rachmaninoff is something fantastic. One of my ancestors was in the Portuguese embassy in Russia during the times of Catherine the Great. This land has been in my family for 250 years. There was a protection at some point in the Portuguese history because the British was buying a lot of wine from the north. There was a protection to the business of wine in the north, in the port. One of your salesmen didn't like the Alicante machine. What's his name?
This, yeah, this one.
He was there. Tell him to try it again because it's exceptional. They have struggled to live for a long time. That's why they still struggle, and that's why they produce such exceptional grapes. They just have to discover it. That's all. It's your business. Portugal is a small country, but our weather conditions and our climate and our soils differ a lot from north to south. So we are a country with traditions. We have had grape production and wine production in most of the country. Locally, I mean, especially for local consumption, but a long time ago, we started exporting wines. So, of course, sometimes the wines didn't travel very well, so they were fortified. And hence, you know, the port and the barrel, wines that have been fortified and that have traveled all over the world and to Russia, of course, as well. But you know, fortified wine is only a very small part of the wine production in Portugal. It's only made in the north of Portugal, in the Douro Valley, but the rest of the country also produces wines. And the interesting thing about wine is that they are mainly produced from local varietals. They are not only produced from local varietals, but mainly produced from local varietals. So we have a lot of different grapes, which sometimes are difficult for people to pick from a shelf of a shop because they're not familiar with the grape. But once they risk the fact of drinking it, it's quite a good experience, and they will, of course, be surprised, and they will like it and will want to drink it again. So it's Portugal, in a sense, something unknown, but also by that fact very interesting, because we are always inundated with a lot of brands from everywhere, which already know we have some expectations about those brands. But in the sense of Portuguese grapes and Portuguese brands and Portuguese wines, we don't really have preconceived ideas, and so it's an interesting adventure. First of all, because the Portuguese like to drink it. We drink a lot of our wine, so a lot of it was drunk in the country. And so exports 30 or 40 years ago, it was, I mean, port wine, of course, went everywhere, especially to to England. The British were probably the first people to seriously look into exporting wine from Portugal because they had access to us. We had a long alliance or treaty with them, which was commercial. We got wool and fabrics from them, and we exported wines to them. And we have been allied for a long time. They've always helped us. You know, Portugal is a small country. Spain is a big country next to us, and it's always been this temptation of the Spanish to get Portugal in the big peninsula nation. And we've always resisted very, historically, we have always resisted the Spanish and the English helped us. So we have had this very good relationship with the English and a long treaty, commercial exchange, a long history of exporting things. But the wine has always been directed to the British. They always know what is best in one country, so they try to keep it to themselves. There was a protection at some point in the Portuguese history. Because the British was buying a lot of wine from the north, there was a protection to the business of wine in the north, in port. So the planting of vineyards is not free in Portugal. You cannot plant a vineyard. You have to have a license. You have to have a permission. And those permissions were blocked until the 18th century. And this area was one of the first to open up because the prime minister at the time, which was very important, the Marquess of Pombal, he was very important. He was very close to the king, and he was a very clever man, and he knew a lot about business and about trade. And in fact, he was very, very strong politically and economically. And he was a very good friend of my ancestors, who then were also influential people. So they got the first privilege or the first permissions to plant vineyards in this area. So that's why we have it for such a long time. This land has been in my family for 250 years now. A lot of the production was the local consumption. We used to do a lot of brandy also, you know. So we used to distill wine because it's an important for the port business. And we used to sell wine locally. In 1990, we have new areas of certified production of wine, in which Ribatejo was included. So, although we used to make wine before, it was a wine that was not certified like DOC, and we only had the certification in 1990. So we had been producing wine for a long time, and when we got the permission to certify, which means we could put the origin, the year, production, the varietals of grapes used in the production, a lot of specifications. That was only allowed in the label, and the certification was only started in 1990. So we started marketing with these brands in 1990. For you to retain, you have to be producing wine for more than 2 decades. in Tejo, Ribatejo, the historical recipe for wines here used to be Castelão and Alicante Puxê for the wine, the reds. Historically, for the whites, Fernão Pires, and that is perfectly settled, and I think it's the best grape that you can grow in Tejo. Although we have now added some other grape varietals, but the Fernão Pires is still dominant, and it's still the number one grape in Tejo. It's made of Fernão Pires, but from a vineyard that is over 70 years old. So it's very stabilized, very mature grape, perfect balance of acidity. We get a longevity, which is very nice. You have to try a white. You don't try a white from here yet. But we do it in a more simple version, which is the Quinta do Casal Branco, also 100% Fernão Pires. It's not as complex, but still very elegant and very well balanced. Then we do it in a more easy to understand label, which is this capoeira. Capoeira, this image of Portugal, which is a typical image of Portugal, which is this cock from the north of Portugal. But this is a simpler wine, easy to understand, very easy to appreciate, and it's very direct. There's no, you don't need to know much about wine to understand that this is an excellent wine. So on the reds, we start also with the Capoeira, which is a more simple wine. But as I was explaining, we have two grapes which are the base of the recipe of Tejo, and it's Castelão and Alicante Puxê. And why do I say this? Because it's what we had mostly in our vineyard before. Now we have introduced some French grapes and some grapes from other regions like the Touriga Nacional, Touriga Franca, Costa Cabernet, the Merlot, the Shiraz. We have different grapes, but the base of our wines, the base of our region really, our typicity, our character, our style is the Castelão and the Alicante Puxê. And why these two grapes? Complement themselves. I think the Castelão has a lot of similarities to Pinot Noir because it's elegant, you know, it's not too deep, not too structured. It's an elegant wine and lots of fruit. So that's why I like to think that it's like Pinot Noir. So it's a light wine that is very enjoyable, but I think it lacks normally a bit of structure, a bit of strength, a bit of longevity, and that is given by the Alicante Puxê way. And for instance, this Alicante Puxê is now 8 years old, full of fruit and strength, and it's really, I was surprised because I haven't drunk a lot of it because we don't have a lot of bottles left of this wine. Really worth the tasting. Then, of course, the Quinta do Casal Branco is also a blend of these historical varietals, but we have some Touriga Nacional, we have some Cabernet Sauvignon. Even though we have this historical blend, we are always trying to get a nicer balance. And so we have this opportunity to blend with other varietals. This is exceptional. This we only do every now and then. I mean, we don't do it every year because we need to make sure that it's exceptional quality. And this is made from a very special vineyard, which is over 100 years old. So it's a vineyard that is has two grapes planted together, and they've been there for such a long time that although they are different, they flower in the same time, they mature in the same time, they've grown together, so they are there a family for a long time, and they produce this exceptional wine, which is, the yield per hectare is very low. Sometimes it's 2,000 kilos, sometimes it goes up to 4,000, 4,500 kilos, but it never goes over that because it's an old vineyard, but it's always exceptional quality. And so there's a good balance already in the vineyard. We vinify the vineyard together. We don't separate because it's impossible to separate the grapes. So we pick the vineyard and we vinify together. And the result, it's normally exceptional. Very old building. Mm-hmm. And it's a pigeon house for pigeons. It used to be where pigeons were breeding, so you could use the manure of the pigeons for the kitchen garden. It's also, the pigeons are good to eat. The small pigeons are delicious. They are very famous. But also, one of the most important reasons for the breeding of the pigeons was for training falcons. It's an art of hunting that we call falcoeria. That's the name of the wine, falcoeria, you see? Before it belonged to my family, this ground was a hunting ground for the royal family of Portugal, who used to have a palace not very far from here. The village of Almeida, there was an important royal palace that unfortunately is no longer there because it was destroyed with an earthquake, and there was a big fire, and it was destroyed. And the royal family never built again a palace here. They had other palaces, so they left this land, and they gave it to families which were friends. So that's why my family got it. And but it's a very important area, and the palace, the royal palace of Almeida, was a place where the royal family used to come a lot, because in the 16th century and 17th century, Lisbon was a very busy city, and it had a lot of a big population sailing to all the world, from Africa to India to South America, and a lot of people came to Lisbon, and the port was very important, very busy. But on the same time, because a lot of people were there coming from different parts of the world, there were a lot of diseases, and so the royal family tried to avoid Lisbon. So they used to get out of Lisbon a lot and spend long periods of time in Almeida. So they used to hunt a lot, and they had this building was part of their hunting lodge. Throughout, history, the Tagus River has gone from one side to the other. Now it's in this part, and it's staying there. But it must have been wider, and so we have our soils. We have some soils which are alluvial soils, which are very rich, but we don't use them for vineyards. We use it for other crops. But our vineyards are all in the sandy soils, which are deposits of the river, but very, very old. They are from the Miocene, so prehistorical sands, which underneath have a little bit of clay. So on the surface, they are not very rich, and they have not a lot of humidity, but underneath they are clay, so they retain the humidity. So the vineyards, nowadays we can irrigate if we want, but the old vines, we could not irrigate. There was no form of irrigation. So the old vines had to really fight to go down and reach the clay so that we could have water all the time. And so that's why the old vines are very special. That's why we look after them very much with lots of care, because they have struggled to live for a long time. And that's why they still struggle, and that's why they produce such exceptional grapes. Horses are nowadays a luxury, of course, but in the old times, horses were used for work. So we have the big estate, 1,100 hectares. It was a natural historical need. But nowadays we don't need horses for that, but we still keep breeding, and we have developed it for dressage purposes. So we have horses for competition in dressage, and for bullfighting, which is an ancient tradition in Portugal as well. And for riding normally, generally, but general purpose of riding. I ride every day if I can. Very, very special day in the winery was when we launched our first Falcoaria. It was the vintage of '89, and it was the first bottled wine for commercial use. You know? And it was important because it was the first wine that was certified in the Tejo area. So for us, it was a pioneer moment, you know. And it was very uncertain because in 1990, so 30 years ago, the market of certified wines in Portugal was very small. And even in the world, the consumption of wine is not what it is today. I mean, in 1990, the consumption of wine was very much more concentrated in some special product from France, some Italian wines, but not as widely spread as it is nowadays. So that was very important. It was like a new world, you know, that opens up, and you have to decide the name. It was the Falcoaria. You have to decide what type of wine you want to make, what type of brand, the label, the bottle, everything. It was a new world and a new challenge. And for Casal Branco, it was very important because it was change of being a wine producer in general to becoming a certified wine producer, and you know, dealing directly with the consumer. It was something very important. One of my ancestors was in the Portuguese embassy in Russia during the times of Catherine the Great. So there's a long tradition of my family, especially, not just the Portuguese, but my family with Russia. It was only, you know, the first time I came to Russia last year, I loved it. But I've always felt a very good connection with Russia because of that, because we've had a long history of Russia. But I'm sure my wines will be adapting very well to the Russian market. It's just a matter of discovery.